So my name's Sarah Hayton. I'm in charge of managing recruitment for the next cohort for the MSc in Major Programme Management, which I hope you will know is this September 2015. I'm joined by Dr Eamonn Molloy, who is the module leader for designing and managing successful programmes, the first module of 8 in the MSc, and we're delighted to be speaking with you today. So I just wanted to cover first, before we get into it proper, what we'll be going through in the next hour or so. So the session today really is to give you a really good taster of Eamonn's module, and we'll spend around 20 minutes or so on that. We'll then go to some basic information, some key facts about the MSc, and I'll run through some of the admissions procedures. And then there'll be some time, around 20 minutes or so, for you to ask questions. So if I could ask you all to note any questions you have, either around Eamonn's material, Eamonn's slides, or around any of the admissions procedures, and keep them to the end, that would be very much appreciated. And all questions will be via the text and chat function that we'll take at the end. Thank you very much. I'll now hand over to Eamonn Molloy.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. As Sarah said, I'm the module leader for designing and managing successful programs on the MSc in Major Programme Management. That's the first module that we teach, so it's very much a foundation module which sets some of the kind of key themes, concepts and frameworks which run throughout the rest of the course. And key to that is the idea of thinking about major projects and major programs as organizations in their own right, rather than simply a set of processes or methodologies that need to be followed. So what I'm going to do in this session is go into a little bit more detail about how we conceptualize projects and programs as organizations on the MSc, and also how practically thinking about projects and programs as organizations helps us see some of the leadership and management issues that come up with major programs, and also help to explain why projects and programs, particularly large projects and programs, seem to consistently cost more, take longer, and deliver less than expected time and time again. Okay, so before we do that, I just want to outline the key steps in the presentation. So I'm going to, first of all, talk a little bit about the context of major projects and programs, so why it is that they seem to be becoming a more popular form of organization in their own right. Then I'm going to look at major programs as organizations and the different elements of organization that major programs have. Then I'm going to show how major programs can differ from each other, and what the implications of this are for how we lead and manage those major programs. And then finally, I'm going to introduce very briefly an organization design model that helps us think about the different elements and components of major programs, and how we can make those align, and ideally in a way that makes the organization more efficient and improves the delivery outcomes. A quick word about myself, just before we get started on that. I'm a strategist and organization theorist, so I'm personally interested in how we build organizations, whether we call them projects or programs or companies or firms, that actually deliver the strategic objectives. So for me, organization is just a vehicle for delivering the strategic objectives of the business. So that's where I come from. Okay, so what I'll do now is move to the first slide. What we're seeing right now is a rise in interest in project-based organizing, and this is global. It's not just confined to developed countries or developing countries, but it's an organization form that seems to be replacing large firms, not entirely, but also markets and institutions. Some of the drivers for this are shorter investment horizons from financial investors. It's also because of the rise of global competition between different countries, and also an increase in the use of technology, particularly information and communication technologies, which means that firms in particular, but also governments and government departments, need to be more flexible, need to be more responsive to changing conditions, and as a result are moving towards more temporary and more short-term forms of organising. So that's a little bit of context about why we're seeing the emergence of project-based organising, growing interest in project-based organising, and particularly the emergence of this organisational form, or this kind of strange animal that we call major programs. Despite that, most of our, or a lot of our project and program management theory, but also I would argue practice, is still dominated by the idea that somehow projects and programs are just a process, that it's a methodology that needs to be followed, and if only we had the right methodology, then all our project and program management problems would go away. I think that's too simplistic. I think there's a lot of variation in the size, shape, nature and purpose of major programs, and just as much variation, in fact, as you might find amongst firms. So just as I wouldn't stand up in front of the FTSE 500 chief executives and tell them that I've discovered one best way to run all their organizations, I wouldn't stand up in front of 500 of the biggest major project leaders and say that I found one best way to run all their organizations or programs either. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, and our students on the MSc in Major Program Management are making a good headway into doing this work, into investigating what kinds of organizations major programs most closely resemble, and therefore matching leadership, management, and organization design in an appropriate way, or as we say on the course, in a contingent way, to those objectives. Most of our existing theory on particularly project-based organising resembles a sort of factory model or industrial images of organisation, and I think that's not reflective of the practice, where we see organisations that are much more complex, much more flexible, and of course in the major program context change over the life cycle of the projects and programs as well. So major projects and programs are not static or fixed organizations. They're temporary, and they're dynamic, and they're changing throughout the life cycle. And this introduces a whole range of management and leadership challenges which cannot be fixed only by following a simple prescribed methodology or process. Okay, so I'm going to now say a little bit more, having said something about the context of major programs, a little bit more about what the elements or components of major programs are. So on this slide, you'll see in the middle we have major programs. I should probably say that I'm also happy to use the term major project interchangeably. We can and do have a good discussion about the difference between projects and programs quite early on the MSc course, and all we need to know for now is that effectively the terms are used interchangeably, but they also can be used to make important distinctions. But let's just go with major programs for now. Major programs, like other kinds of organizations, have a physical structure. So this is the equipment, materials, buildings, places where the major programs take place. This is true just as much for infrastructure projects, such as tunnels, roads, bridges, as it is for aerospace projects, such as satellites, aircraft carriers. They also have technology, so this is the information communication technology, as well as hardware and software that are part of either the output of the program itself, but also the infrastructure that supports the program. Again, true for infrastructure, aerospace, IT, but also transformation programs. So think about large reorganizations such as restructuring the health service in the UK, or restructuring a bank. these are major programs too, even though there's not necessarily a infrastructure or hardware output. Major programs, like other organizations, have a social structure, and what I mean by that is a hierarchy. So there's leadership, there's a senior management team, there are support staff, there's a huge amount of organization of people and processes that needs to happen around major programs. And some of that is formal social structure, such as, if you think about the organization chart, with roles and responsibilities and tasks delimited. But some of it is also the informal social structure. So just like in organizations we have politics, and sometimes positive and sometimes negative, we also have that in the context of major programs as well. And finally, and this is sometimes a bit of a controversial topic, major programs also have sometimes their own culture. We all know the expression that the program has taken on a life of its own. And particularly if you think about major programs with very long duration, for example, if you think about a submarine program, you're looking at 20 or 30 years work involved in delivering that major program. And people can spend entire careers in one or two major programs. As a result, they do take on a life of their own. They do adopt a culture. And this is important from a management and leadership point of view to pay attention to these things. I would also argue that particularly the social structure and culture piece of major programs as organizations is the piece that's very often overlooked, particularly when we look at some of the kind of systems engineering approaches to running major projects and major programs. Okay, so it's important to draw attention to those different elements. And on the course, we dig into much deeper into how each of these different pieces can be managed and how these vary across different projects and programs, and what the implications are for leadership and management of major programs. Okay, changing tack a little bit. Now, I want to look at, well, we see that major projects and programs are organizations of these different components. But looking at the volume variety matrix, which is probably a very familiar model to a lot of you, it comes straight out of operations management textbooks. I want to think about, well, what kind of organizations are major programs? And my argument would be that we've got a lot of different kinds of organizations that are major programs. For example, if you look at the volume variety matrix, in the bottom right hand, we have continuous, which is continuous production. So an organization down here is effectively the ideal mass production factory. So think about an organization that's making paper clips or pencils. Organizations that run factories, production lines, use of technology, a lot of standardization, a lot of process control, statistical process control methods, and optimization. These organizations are competing on the cost of unit of production, so they need to make pencils cheaper than their competitors, and if you excuse the pun, if they can shave off a fraction of a pence on the production of each pencil, then they will do, and that's how they stay in business. At the other end are what we might think of as a pure project organization. So think here perhaps about a satellite, a one-off satellite. Organizations up here are competing entirely on the specification of their output. So making a one-off, one-time only product or service. The strategy of these organizations, and therefore their organization, is very different from those at the continuous end. In between, we have things like make-to-order and batch production. Batch production might be something like perishable goods, such as ice cream. So you make lots of it in the summer, you don't make so much of it in the winter. Or fashion items, so you might make a run of, I don't know, flared jeans, but you don't make them in a continuous because of the nature of demand fluctuates. And make-to-order would be something a bit more bespoke, such as, here you could think of fairly standard type construction projects, where the buildings are made off a template, but they're only made when an order is placed for them. So we can imagine that there's, but we can also imagine major projects that fit these categories. So some major projects have within them elements of continuous production. So for example, if we take an aerospace project, within that there's definitely mass production processes in place. For example, producing rivets or producing wiring for aircraft. Likewise, there's batch, there's make to order, and there's project elements. So within a major program, we see all these different kinds of organizations as well. What I'm hoping you're sort of picking up now is that there's a different layering or nesting of organization forms within the major program as an organization in its own right. If this sounds complicated, it's because it is complicated. Major programs are very complex organizations, and as a result, they require leadership, management, as well as structures and processes that help reduce that complexity. Also, it means that there's no single one best way to run major programs. There's generalizable principles, which we'll get into a moment, which can be applied across different major program contexts. But there is no single one best way that I would argue to run major projects. So that highlights some of the complexity of the different kinds of organizational forms that exist within major program context. And again, on the course, we go into much more detail about this, and I'd obviously be happy to take any questions afterwards after this presentation. What I want to do now is, in order to try and reduce some of this complexity, it's not just a case of anything goes anytime. Some work that I did with a colleague called Peter van Donk is we took a classic piece of organization theory, Henry Mintzberg's work, and thought to see if we could apply that to classifying different kinds of projects and programs. So I won't go into enormous detail here, but if you look at this slide, this is taken from the publication that Peter van Donk and myself published in 2008. It's in the International Journal of Project Management, and it's called From Projects as Organizations to Organizations as Projects. I'd be happy to send you the reference for that if you like. And what we did was took Mintzberg's classification or typology of organizations, which you see in the left-hand column. So here, simple organizations, machine bureaucracies, professional bureaucracies, divisionalized form, and ad hocracies. And we tested it to see if we could find analogies in the project world, and we did. We found, for example, that some projects were like the simple structure, where the key coordination mechanism is direct supervision, the key element was the project leader, and examples of things like events, one-off events, disaster relief, business unit mergers, that kind of thing. Without going through them all, it might also be worth looking at things like the divisionalized projects, which I think major programs are very much like, in a way, a multi-divisional organization, where they have lots of different projects running within them. There are lots of different ways of organizing going on within it. They're looking at trying to standardize outputs, and the key elements are often contract managers, account managers, the middle line. There's a lot of coordination that needs to take place between lots of different contracting parties. So, for example, if you think of a big government program like, in the UK we have High Speed Rail 2. It's a £50 billion program, 20-25 years, hugely transformational in its ambition, and there are government departments involved in that, including the Department of Transport, Planning, Environment, that need to coordinate. There's also contractors involved. There's a lot of bidding going on for different pieces of work. The regulators are involved, and all that work needs to be coordinated. And each of those parties all works in their own way, has their own structure, has their own culture, has their own strategies. So, in a way, major programs fit the kind of divisionalized model fairly closely, although not completely, because as we see, there's also another structure, which is the ad hocracy, which is a little bit like the project-based organization in the previous slide, which is at the top left-hand side. So high variety, very low volume, one-off, and you might think here of spacecraft like the NASA shuttle, where you're optimizing on collaboration and expertise in a temporary organization. So I'd encourage you to, if you're interested in thinking about what kind of project or program you're in and what sort of organization that is, to have a look at some organization theory and try and picture in your own mind, what exactly is it that your project or program is optimizing on in terms of how it's organized. So that's some of the theory, and I would argue that there's lots of different kinds of organization theory that we can bring to the study and understanding of major programs. I encourage our students on this program, particularly through their dissertation work, to take some organization theory like contract theory, for example, or economic theory or behavioral theories of the firm, and see if they apply in the major program context that they work in. And we've had some very interesting results from those dissertations, and a number of them are actually being published in journals. So there's a great opportunity on this program to make a bit of a name for yourself by publishing in journals such as the Project Management Journal, the International Journal of Project Management. One of my previous students, Trish Audit, and I have just published in the Project Management Journal, and she looked at the legacy outcomes of the South African World Cup Stadium program. And that's generated an awful lot of interest. Okay, so finally then, on a practical note, I like to think about improving the delivery of major programs by thinking about them as organizations, as we've already discussed, and thinking of them as organizations that have a strategy, they exist for a purpose, they have objectives, and then there's a structure that goes with that. So, like we saw in the volume variety matrix, structure should follow strategy. So if you're trying to compete in the pencil market, you're building a factory. You don't build pencils on a project-by-project basis. And likewise, processes support those structures. That's by processes, I mean information systems, management accounting systems, recruitment, retention, contract management, all that stuff that has to happen to make a program work. Then there's the rewards piece, and by rewards I don't just mean financial rewards, but of course we all do get out of bed to help pay our mortgages, but I also mean intrinsic rewards as well for participation. So why people get out of bed in the morning and go to work is not simply for financial reward, although that's often important. It's also for recognition and to contribute to something that they believe in. And then finally, people. Here by people I mean skill sets, capabilities that you have. So major programs have all these elements, and the management challenge and the leadership challenge is really to make sure that all these align around the strategy. On the course, we do a whole afternoon workshop where we apply this model to a case study, and it's interesting that very often the different teams come up with different solutions to the case study problem, all of which are feasible. And again, just underlines the importance not of a single methodology, but of having the management and leadership capability to organize major projects so that they're successful in terms of their outcomes. So now I just want to finally summarize where we've been today, I hope. So I think I've made the case that we can consider projects and programs as temporary organizations. I think I've also made the case that organization theories that have developed mostly for permanent organizations like firms or government departments can also be applied to temporary organizations. But there are some important limitations, and it's interesting and fun to explore those. And I think that this has implications for how we lead and design major programs. So I think at that point, I'll go quiet, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you very much, Eamonn. So Eamonn's really given us a taster of some of the material that you would see on the first module. What we can't recreate, unfortunately, is the real interactive nature of these sessions. So unlike, I guess, some of your first degrees, if you can think back that far, or some more sort of standard manual-based programs or courses. This program really is about bringing your own challenges with you, your own experience with you, and the discussions in the room and the people in the room. And one of the things that I will go on to talk about is a little bit about the group that you'll be with over the 2 years. So first, if I just take you through what we call key facts on this next slide. So this program is for senior experienced managers, and we talk about it being a program about major projects and major programs. And as Eamonn touched on, that can take a form of many different things, whether that's a change program, whether that's something that's physically producing something, such as an airport or a bridge, but also if you're managing a complex environment, a large-scale IT project, something like that. So really the other really interesting thing about this program is the different industries that you'll see represented on the program, and I'll touch on that again later. If you don't know already, so one thing I think I'd like to just backtrack and mention, those of you who I haven't spoken with yet, I know on this call today there are some people that I have spoken with and some people that I haven't. Those of you that I haven't spoken with yet, I'd be really pleased to just chat with you either after the webinar or sometime in the next couple of weeks to learn about your own circumstances and why you're looking to do the program. And that's just really important. This is such a commitment. It's really important to just talk to us as soon as possible and build on what you've learned from this webinar. So the program is delivered in 8 modules over 2 years. In fact, what this means is that the 8 modules of 4 days in Oxford take place over a year and a half, so September to sort of late March. And then you actually have 6 months where we release you back into your own environment, back to your own jobs fully to complete your dissertation. And that dissertation, as mentioned there, is a 10,000-word dissertation, and most people will do something related to their roles, but I can talk to you a bit further outside of this webinar about the types of dissertation projects that people work on if that's of interest. And really, it's worth us mentioning that this program is unique in the marketplace. And run in association with the BT Centre for Major Programme Management, so we have research capability there. Okay, so what will you gain from this MSc? So as you can imagine, there are various aspects of this, and sometimes people are looking for 1 or 2 things, but actually what you may end up with, the outcomes from this may be quite different to what you think you're going into it for. So there's the personal development, so there's the content, there's the opportunity to challenge yourself and grow in that way, but also there's the confidence that it will give you. So the people in the room that you'll mix with, the type of conversations that you're having really will give you an opportunity to try out new ways of thinking, new ways of questioning, and take that straight back into your role. So the idea of the program, the fact that you're in Oxford for 4 days, you go back to your own, workplace, does mean that this has absolute immediate application back into your workplace. So if you're one of around 50% that are funded by your employer, there's an excellent case there to be company sponsored, and we can help you with some of those things either through case studies or linking you with alumni that can talk about how that's had amazing impact into their workplace. And it's really worth us mentioning the networks as well. So there's several ways that you'll see networks. There's your own cohort that you'll go through the 2 years with. There's also 5 years, so the program started in 2009, so 6 years now of groups that have gone through this that you can draw from. And then you have the wider university, so the Oxford Business Alumni Network, which is a fantastic resource, events and online sessions that you can dip into. And also, of course, your college. So part of this MSc, really valuable part of this is that you will be a member of a college as well as a member of Saïd Business School. And that's a lifelong benefit, and you'll find that separate to the people that you meet and work with on the actual program, you can make connections with your college that will stay with you and help you throughout your career. So in terms of who you will be with, as I mentioned, it really is a diverse group. You'll see from the chart there on the slide that we really represent industries across the board. And that's something that we strive to do because we recognise that the group around you really is a resource as well. And that's the same really for nationalities as well. So around 32% are UK, and you'll really see, across, again, from the chart, a spread across nationalities. And this will change ever so slightly from year to year. But again, we have people from across the world. And in terms of, you might be questioning whether that's actually possible to fly in for the 4 days and come back and forth. We have people doing that from Australia, from Asia, from America. And again, I'd be more than happy to put you in touch with alumni who've managed that along with their family life and their career, and just talk a little bit about that. Okay, so here just for you, just to touch on the 8 module titles. So I won't talk you through each of those. Again, we can do that separately if there are specifics that you want to check on. I've had conversations recently with people about what each module actually covers in depth, and we can talk through that. What's important to mention really is the nature of each of these modules. So the idea being there are facts and figures in this, there are theories, but we present multiple theories in the majority of these modules, and it's an opportunity to discuss and explore and to discuss what you've already tried, as well as discussing the theories that are put forward by Oxford. So down to some more facts and figures. In terms of investment, so the fees there are there for you to see. The 34,848 sounds a little bit specific. That's because it includes a college fee, which will sort of change by £50 to £100 each year, but it's around about there. And that includes pretty much everything you can need apart from your accommodation and travel. So it's worth mentioning you need to factor in the accommodation for yourself whilst you're in Oxford for the 4 days for each module. And in terms of time, so there's the time that you're in Oxford. It's really, really important to consider the commitment you're making in terms of your time. So not only the time that you're in Oxford, but the work that you'll have to put in before and after that. So as well as the dissertation, there are assessments by assignment. So 8 assignments, no exams whatsoever, which I think the majority of people think is a really good thing. It's usually quite a long time since anyone's done an exam. But allowing, we say here, around 10 hours of study per week. I think some people will find it slightly more than that, but you'll find before each module there's reading to be done, and that's all mandatory. All of that reading needs to be done. And then you'll find after that there's maybe some more reading to be done, but certainly the assignments are complete. So allow 10 hours of study per week for the full 2 years. Okay, so in terms of the basic requirements, I would really say that if you're at all unsure whether you meet the requirements, please just give me a call on the office number on the website, and I'll contact you with my details afterwards. Because really the key thing here isn't necessarily about what somebody scored on their undergraduate degree 20 years ago. We want to see somebody's sort of journey as a whole. We want to see what they've done with their career. So it's not really so much about ticking boxes, but as a basic guideline, we look for a good undergraduate degree, a minimum of 7 years relevant professional experience. Though I will say that the majority of people have sort of far exceed that. For example, the average age of the group that's here at the moment is 42, so you can imagine that actually the experience there is sort of closer to 15 to 20 years relevant experience. And I do see the nationality is spread, but we do need to see an official English test if English is not your native language. And application is all fully online, as you'd expect, and we will need for that a up-to-date CV, which we ask you to upload, and the details for 2 references. So we don't ask you to actually supply the references, but we'd like you to supply the details for 2 referees, so their name and contact details. One of those ideally should be your direct line manager. We'd also like to see transcripts of your previous higher education qualifications, and these are the module marks rather than a certificate or a actual official award. And you also need to complete 3 essays as part of your online application. And that really is the chance for you to show your thinking, show the kind of conversation or the experience you'd be putting forward in the lecture room if you were to get onto the program. So the titles of those essays are what would you bring to the program? They are what do you think are the qualities of a major program or major project manager? And the third, a discussion piece for you to talk about 2 major programs and to either compare these or talk about why you think they were particularly successful or unsuccessful. And again, I can talk through any aspect of that if you've got any questions at all.